Hello, and welcome to the 2024 UC Berkeley Stone Center on Wealth and Income Inequality Annual Lecture. I'd like to welcome and thank Céline Bessière, Professor of Sociology at Paris Dauphine University, for being with us today and for delivering this year's Stone Lecture. Her co-author, Sibylle Gollac, will be joining us via Zoom for the Q&A. I'm Raka Ray, Dean of the Social Sciences here at Berkeley, and it's my great honor to open today's program. First, I'd like to thank Dr. James M. Stone and Kathy D. Stone, and to welcome all of those who are joining us virtually. Congratulations to the Stones and to the Stone Foundation Executive Director, Sonia Plesset, on the recent announcement of 3 new Stone Centers joining the global network of which we are so honored to be a part. Congratulations and welcome to the University of British Columbia, the Paris School of Economics, and the Ludwig Maximilians Universität Munich. The UC Berkeley Stone Center is led by Professor Emmanuel Saïs, and under his leadership and that of his predecessor and collaborators, the center has become a campus hub for research and teaching on wealth and income inequality. The center supports a wide range of research activity and community engagement, and the impact of this work can be seen on policy and in the proliferation of scholars working on these critical questions through the center's Summer Academy, grant program, and visiting scholars network. Doing the difficult work to address wealth and income inequality is part of UC Berkeley's DNA. And the Stone Center now plays a vital role in elevating, expanding, and coordinating this work across campus. So thank you to everyone at the Stone Center, our colleagues at the various Stone Centers around the world, and all of you today for being with us. To introduce the featured speaker and program, I'd like to welcome Stone Center Faculty Director, Emmanuel Saïs. Emmanuel.
Thank you, Raka, for this introduction where you said it all almost. So I'm going to be short. Welcome, everybody, to our annual Stone Lecture. Thank you to our funders, Jim and Kathleen Stone, who made such an event possible. So let me just say a few words about the program and the lecture. So today, we're going to hear Céline Bessière, who is professor at Dauphine University in Paris, talk about her recent book with Sibylle Gollac on the gender of capital. So the book was translated in English last year, and Céline is on a book tour, spending the semester at NYU, so we're very fortunate to have her come here to present her work. So she's a professor of sociology, and Sibylle is also a sociologist, but I want to point out that this work on understanding wealth inequality across gender lines really requires working, at a multidisciplinary level. It's economics, but economics is not enough because while we can easily observe, how much men and women earn, when they work for pay, wealth is more complex. There are married couples, how property rights are defined is a complex issue that immediately brings you into law and justice. And also, what are the rules, besides that, that is the more informal sociology of behavior. So that's why you need, comprehensive knowledge across those lines, and that's the impressive work that Céline and Sibylle are going to talk about. So so about the program. So Céline will talk for about 45 minutes. Then we'll have a good 25 minutes for questions from the audience. And after that, you are all welcome to a reception just out of this conference room, for drinks and refreshments to continue the conversation. Céline, your turn. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for having me here at Matrix Social Science. Thank you, Raka. Thank you, Emmanuel. Thank you, Agate, for organizing this. So I'm very happy to present this book to you. So let's see how it works. Yeah, like this. So this is the English version of the book. Which was translated so by Juliette Rogers. I think it's very important to mention translators because she did such a beautiful job, and also translated into a graphic essay last year with Jeanne Puchol, and we show you some of her drawings. Okay, so let's go. Welcome. So the demonstration of our book starts from a double observation. First, wealth inequality between families has increased globally since the 1980s, even more than income inequality. In 2021, the wealthiest 10% owns more than 3/4 of global wealth, whereas the bottom 50% owns a mere 2%. So this is not my work, but Emmanuel's one, and with the World Inequality Lab. Work and World Inequality Report. You find all this online. It's such a beautiful website that they did. In 2014, in France, the richest 10% hold around 55% of the national wealth, while half of the population holds a mere 5%. In uncertain times characterized by precarity in working and personal life, the ability of storing wealth has become a key defining feature of contemporary existence. Wealth inequality is becoming the main indicator of the widening gap between the super rich and the rest of society, and the lack of savings and assets a reliable measure of poverty. Wealth brings income and gives access to credit, self-employment, higher education, and housing. If one can afford the right address, homeownership is a mark of social distinction. Wealth is also crucial for living standards in the old age. Wealth contributes more and more to the definition of social position all over the life. There are two different ways of accumulating wealth, by putting money aside or by inheriting it. Inheritance represented 70% to 80% of the private wealth held by individuals in Europe until 1910, but these levels then plummeted with the two world wars to 30–40% in the 1950s and 80s, only to rise again later. It's currently over 60%. As you know, the US pattern, albeit less marked, follows the same U-shaped curve over the 20th century. We are certainly a long way from the 1910s, but if current economic and demographic trends continue, the inherited portion of wealth will only increase over the 21st century. It is more and more difficult for individuals without inheritance to become members of the wealthier classes solely off their earnings from work. And inheritance is a family issue. So this assertion is self-evident in France. The civil code and public financing favor wealth transfers to direct descendants. Children in France cannot be disinherited, and the transfers they receive are only modestly taxed. Inheritances from the death of the mother or the father represent 90% of the value of all inheritances. That inheritance also remains a family issue in contexts where there is no binding legislation. In the United States, for instance, inheritance remains a family intergenerational practice in the same proportions that it does in France. The resurgence of inheritance is tantamount to a return of the family as a key actor in the economy, contributing to socio-economic inequality and reinforcing the boundaries between families of different class and racial backgrounds. These family transfers, therefore, play a central role in the reproduction of social inequalities. So now, our second observation concerns the gender wealth gap. The distribution of wealth by gender has received increasing attention. This gender gap is still strong in many countries. the conservative assumption that women could and should rely on their husband's wealth is outdated. Women on average live a few years longer than men, while they are entitled to lower public pensions. And a growing number of single-headed female households live beneath the poverty line. However, documenting the gender distribution of assets is difficult because of the way information about individual ownership and control of assets is tangled together in different sex couples. Most of the data on wealth are collected at the level of the household, either through declarative surveys or tax data. High-quality wealth surveys describing each member of a household's individual ownership of assets are hard to come by, but there are two notable exceptions. The first one is the German Socioeconomic Panel, which measures a significant gender wealth gap in Germany, not only between single men and women, but also within unmarried and married couples. The second one is carried out in France. Since 1998, the French Wealth Survey has recorded with varying degrees of accuracy who owns the various assets in the households. Two colleagues, economists, Nicolas Frémaux and Marion Le Turc, have conducted a study based on this survey, which shows that the gender wealth gap is widening in France. Between 1998 and 2015, the gender wealth gap almost doubled from 9% of the population mean wealth to 16%. And this increase concerns both singles and couples. Socioeconomic literature has explored three sets of explanation of the gender wealth gap. First, women and men have been found to have systematically different portfolio structures. They save and invest differently with diverging levels of return. For instance, women are significantly less likely to own business assets and own less risky assets than men. Some economists consider that women are more risk adverse than men, it would be tempting to link this difference to differentiated socialization, which is our sociological concept. But isn't it risky to interrupt one's career to take on domestic work, as we will see later, without any guarantee of compensation in case of separation? So maybe we could discuss this risk-adverse hypothesis. The second and dominant explanation for the gender wealth gap is the gender division of labor that occurs both in the household and on the labor market. It is the main explanation of the wide gender wealth gap in Germany and its closing in the 2000s. In France, women still provide 2/3 of the domestic work. They earn 25% less than men, and a woman living in a couple, married or not, earns 42% less on average than her partner, and the more children they have, the wider this income gap is. A third explanation for the gender wealth gap insists on the legal frame in which men and women hold their assets, which depends on marital status transitions and laws governing family and property. Many studies show that single-headed households accumulate less wealth than married households. There also exists a marital disruption penalty to wealth accumulation, especially for women. Laws governing marital property and divorce play an important part in gendered wealth accumulation. In contemporary France, the standard default marriage regime is the communauté de biens réduite aux acquis, which is a partial community property. Assets belonging to each prior to marriage or received as inheritance or a family gift after the marriage remain individually owned, and assets acquired by one or both after marriage belong to both equally. My understanding is that it's the same thing here in California, right? When the marriage is dissolved by the death of one partner or through legal separation, the community property is divided into equal share. But fewer couples in the younger generations are choosing to marry. In France today, partners tend to favor simple cohabitation or civil union, which both leave asset management to the individual. 60% of children in France today are born out of wedlock. An increasing share of married couples, especially the wealthier ones, sign separate property contracts. Moreover, the number of marital breakdowns has stabilized at a high level with a total divorce rate of 44 divorces for 100 marriages. As shown by Nicolas Frémaux and Marion Le Turc, these evolutions are part of a trend of individualization of wealth in France that contributes to the widening of the gender wealth gap. Individualization benefits men because division of labor remains and does not allow the same rate of wealth accumulation for men and women. Therefore, the gender wealth gap is linked to the forms of marital unions and to the gender division of labor in different sex couples. To understand it, this gender wealth gap, it is necessary to analyze what happens in the family. And this is what we have done with Sibylle. So this is the French cover of the book. You see the blue one, blue in France, pink in the US. I realized like all the books with the word gender on the title, they were pink here, which was quite surprising. Coming from France. Okay, so to do this, we first decided to focus our analysis on two crucial moments: the breakdown of a marriage or unmarried relationship, and estate planning and settlement. Second, we decided not to focus our analysis on the law in the book, but on the law in practice. In France, inheritance is supposed to be equally shared among daughters and sons since the Napoleonic Civil Code in 1804. Spouses are only formally treated in an equal way since 1985. All mentions of husband and wife have disappeared from the Civil Code concerning assets. France has a gender-neutral law concerning asset ownership. We wanted to understand how inequality is perpetuated despite a formally equal law. Third, we try to hold an intersectional perspective. Certain social classes monopolize wealth and work to preserve it among themselves from one generation to the next, while other classes are persistently deprived of it. At the same time, women accumulate less wealth than men. Class inequality and gender inequality are intertwined. So our work is based first and foremost on the idea that the family is an economic institution. This is an idea that we take from Marxist and materialist feminists such as Silvia Federici, who's based in New York, or Christine Delphi, who's based in France, as well as from economic sociologists as sociologist Viviana Zelizer, who is in Princeton. First, the family produces wealth. If household production were to be taken into account, the GDP in 2010 would have been 33% larger in France. This invisible household production is largely carried out by women and for free. So we put it like numbers from the French Time Youth Survey. I'll let you read them. So you can see that women who live in couples with children, they work more, but it is mostly two-thirds of it is unpaid work, whereas men, it's two-thirds of their work is paid work, which makes a difference at the end of the day. So this is one of the reasons, of course, of the gender wealth gap. But family also organizes wealth circulation, control, and evaluation to ensure its transmission from one generation to the next. Our work shows how these family economic arrangements do not lead to a redistribution of wealth between women and men, but on the contrary, to the maintenance of wealth in the hands of men. This is true in wealthy families, but also in diverse social groups, including working class families, as you will see. So how do we investigate these family economic arrangements? First, we carried out in-depth family case studies based on repeated observations and interviews with groups of kin. We have followed some families for over 10 years, and there are many, many cases in the book that I won't be able to develop here. Otherwise, we're here for the whole day. But because family case studies cannot be used to research a large number of people, and because they make it difficult to compare different social classes, we combine them with statistics, particularly data arising from the French Household Wealth Survey, the one I was mentioning before. Estate planning and marital breakdowns are strictly legally codified. These are matters of family, fiscal, and civil law. So our research thus brought us into the offices of family practice lawyers and notaries, so notaire in French, and my understanding being here is that it's quite different compared to the notaries that you know here in the United States that are just like draft some acts and sign them. Here you will see, I will develop that later, that notaire in France, like they do much more than that. And we also studied what was going on in family courts. With a large research team, that you can see here, we observed meetings with clients and hearings, and we interviewed legal professionals and built a database from 4,000 court files. Thanks to this collective fieldwork in the courts and among lawyers, we've been able to observe very different family situations in very different social groups. From poor racialized single mothers to the 20th fortune of France or couples from the white international elites. So here is the team at work. So you can see the team, this was in a family court. And thanks to the graphic essay and Jeanne Puchol's drawing, you can also see Sibylle that you will see in a minute on the screen. So you might recognize me there and Sibylle next to me. So we are in a lawyer office. So you see up there at the same table, and there is the client in front of us. But of course, we were not saying a word during those lawyer-client meetings. We were just taking notes. And here is another configuration, another lawyer office. So this is the lawyer, the client, and we are behind the client. But of course, we would take notes during the meetings, but after the meetings, the lawyers would say a lot to us about what was going on, about the situation, the different cases. And here is another situation in a family judge office. So you can see the family judge here, the lawyer, litigant, the clerk in front of the computer, and one person from the team, and we were always two observing these family court hearings to take all the verbatim, but also to watch what was going on and take notes. We were not allowed to record at these moments. Okay, so let's say a word about the family case studies and a few results about them. So let's take the Renoir family. So in the Renoir, so this is the family tree in the book and the family tree in the graphic essay, much nicer, right? So in the Renoir family, it was the son, Jean-Paul, that you can see here. Maybe I should use that, right? Then I will be able to move. Yeah, thank you. So Jean-Paul is here, and his two sisters, Françoise first, and Christine. So in the Renoir family, it was the son, Jean-Paul, who inherited the clientele of his accounting parents, even though he was less educated than his two sisters. As he didn't have enough formal qualifications, he had to take on a partner, a business associate, who had the title of chartered accountant. But he wanted to be his own boss, so he sold his parents' accounting firm at one point to set up a real estate agency. It was the eldest grandson is Sylvain here, who went with his grandmother to the lawyer's office when the business was sold. His sister Claire told Sibylle, in Mom's family, so in a very long interview, after 2 hours of interview, in Mom's family, boys are always favored over girls. So Jean-Paul is my grandmother's favorite son. We will all agree on that, just like Sylvain was my mother's favorite son for a long time. It's just like Sally Claude. So this is what Claire is saying. It is unbelievable. Okay, so it is a very, very short time. It is in order to give you just a tiny idea of what is going on in this book and about those family case studies. Now will be more theoretical and maybe more boring. But the concept that we use is the concept of family strategies of social reproduction to understand those dynamics. So this concept was from Pierre Bourdieu and Jean-Claude Passeron. Reproduction describes those mechanisms that preserve social hierarchy over long periods. So the family strategies of social reproduction describes in the same time the mechanism that determine the distribution of positions in that hierarchy within each generation. This mechanism ensures that certain families have a monopoly on the most privileged class positions from generation to generation, while other families are trapped for the long term at the bottom of the social hierarchy. In daily life, individuals, parents, for example, establish family strategies that maintain or improve their own, their kin's, and especially their children's social status. These family strategies of social reproduction can be of several types: marriage strategies, fertility strategies, estate planning, academic strategies, and so forth. So in the 1960s, Bourdieu studied the farming society in southwestern France. He described the early choice of a male successor who will carry on the family's social status, pass on the name, and become the privileged heir to its wealth. We show in our book, through the family case studies, that today in France, some families have assets that must be kept, that are more symbolically and economically important and preferentially passed along to sons. We called these assets structuring assets. The nature of these assets varies according to the family situation and social background. It can be an investment portfolio of stocks and bonds in the wealthiest family. We start the book with the Bezos case, because it was Jeff Bezos was divorcing Mackenzie Scott at the moment we were writing the book. So if you take the Bezos family, the structuring assets, of course, even if they have, I guess, real estate worth millions or I don't know exactly the amounts, like more than millions, dozens of millions, hundreds of millions, of course, the structuring assets for them are the Amazon shares, right? In this family, in the Renoir family, the structuring assets, here is the family business. You remember the accounting business, which became a real estate business at one point. So in some family, it can be a family business or professional property. In other families, it can be a family home or land, right? Depending on the social classes. This masculine inheritance privilege is still visible within the overall population of France, even if contemporary families have to pass on economic and cultural capitals that are inextricably linked. The French Household Wealth Survey permits some generalization. In 2015, for the children of the self-employed, inheritances and inter vivos gifts received by males are more often composed of professional assets than those received by females. The gap is even wider if compared between transfers to all daughters and transfers to first sons. We don't mean here the eldest child, but the first male among siblings. But these differences in the types of assets being transferred based on sex category and birth order do not only concern either small business families or professional assets. For all households, inter vivos gifts and inheritances destined for sons, and even more so for first sons, are significantly more likely to include real estate. The same is true for land and securities. Sons, and especially first sons, get priority for specific assets as opposed to the transfer of money. Thus, 49% of all estate transfers to daughters consist entirely of money, against a similar transfer to 45% of sons. These differences can seem to be trivial differences. You might find that these are small differences. But this is because statistics average out very different situations. In some families, all the children are male or female, while in others, they are not. Situations arise when there is no room to make choices in the inheritance, where all of the assets are liquid, or where the only asset is a piece of real estate and no heir can afford to buy out the others, and therefore it must be sold. The specific role of sons, and especially of first sons, manifests itself not only in the nature of the assets received, but in the timing of when they are transferred. Sons are more likely to receive their lot before daughters, in the form of inter vivos gifts. These forms represent 33% of all estate transfers received by women against 38% of those received by men. To receive such an endowment early in life is an obvious advantage in the further accumulation of wealth during a lifetime. Moreover, family case studies and statistical results show that among different sex couples, these unequal positions of husbands and wives within their families of origin, the age gap between spouses, and the gender inequality of job markets all work together to confer on men greater economic and social power over their partners. The moment of separation reveals the economic inequality that are woven into different sex domestic relationships. It also amplifies pre-existing inequalities. Even today, the cost of breakdown is mainly paid by women. In the 2015 French Wealth Survey, being separated rather than in a couple greatly reduced the likelihood of being a homeowner, all other things being equal. This is what you have here. This correlation is significantly higher to women than it is for men. How can we explain the importance of this mechanism in a society in which the rights of female and male heirs and spouses are formally equal? So let's see now what's happening in the lawyers' and notaries' offices and family courts. To understand the gap between law and practice, we enter the offices of legal professionals. So in France, legal counsel is divided into two professions, and both may be involved in family economic affairs. So we're in the United States. I know you know everything about lawyers, right? But I will spend more time on the notaires, les notaires. So lawyers represent their clients in court or in negotiation in which they are mandated to defend their personal interests, right? So notaries in France are specialized in contracts and fiscal law and are legally mandated to evaluate and distribute family assets. They draw up and settle wills. They manage the transfer of deeds in property transactions. They also draft prenuptial agreements, oversee the liquidation of marital properties. A lot of things that are done here by the lawyers, right? Unlike lawyers, the notaires in France, they don't represent one client, but they act for all parties, more like mediators enforcing the law. Notaries are legally mandated by the Ministry of Justice in France. They are entrusted with the collection of property transfer and partition taxes. So here is the paradox, which is, you will find it quite strange, is the fact that these notaries, because they are agents of the officiers ministériels, so agents of the Ministry of Justice, they collect tax, but at the same time, they are not civil servants. They have a kind of a commercial function as consultants, more like wealth managers, and they give advice to their best clients to pay less tax. And for this, they can set their own fees. So, right, you understand the paradox, like they collect taxes and at the same time they advise the clients to pay less taxes. Weird. So lawyers and notaries help family members to tame family and property law to an extent which depends on their social class. Some families have their notary, some people have their lawyers. For example, if you're a business owner, you may see your lawyer, your accountant, your notary several times per year. But if you're a teacher and your parents aren't so rich, you will see a notary for the first time when you buy your home and a lawyer when you get divorced. So to describe how these family economic arrangements are formalized and the diverse role of legal professionals in making them official, we use the concept of family wealth arrangements. So let me spend like 1 minute on that. So what we call family wealth arrangement is first a process, the oftentimes laborious and or conflictual consensus building process among family members and legal professionals over the appraisal and distribution of family wealth. But second, we define family wealth arrangements as well as the outcome of this process. So those arrangements are never completely definitive. Making arrangements is a perpetual process that outlasts their successive and more or less effective legal formalizations. Moreover, this concept goes beyond the legal opposition between agreement and contention, which is like the main opposition for legal scholars. It provides a finer description of the social production of consensus, including when it's fragile and temporary. So this is all theory, but let's see now what is going on like in practice. So you have to imagine here that you are a notaire in France, right? So let's, for now, just watch the left column. So this is what so with Sibylle and the team, we consulted like hundreds of notary acts at the moment of the liquidation of marital regimes, so at the moment of a divorce, or at the moment of succession or estate planning. At these two moments, basically, what is a notary act? It's something to split wealth. So if you read documents, you will see an inventory of the assets. So what an inventory, it's basically a list. So you have a list of lands, bank accounts, real estate, if there are professional assets, business assets, etc. So a list. And in front of each asset, you will find an amount in euro, so a valuation of the asset. And then you will find an addition of all that, which is the wealth to be shared, and then a division of all that between the different heirs or the two spouses that are getting divorced. Basically, it's quite simple. And at the end, you have this distribution of the assets among the spouses or heirs. And if one person didn't get exactly the good amount, then you have compensation in money, in euros. Okay, so reading like hundreds and hundreds of acts like this, you think that the order or the operation is this one, like inventory, valuation, addition, and then distribution, okay? Actually, in practice, it's quite the opposite. It took us like a long time before understanding that, but once I will tell it to you, you will find it quite obvious. In practice, when a couple enter a notary office or lawyer office to deal with like splitting the assets, they already know who will stay in the home, right? When you have estate planning at the moment of a death, or more often now, like plan in advance, people already know who will get the family business, who will get the family home. So actually, building a consensus on the distribution of assets, who gets what, comes first. And what is going on inside the notary office is a kind of negotiation on the compensation for those who have no assets or assets of lesser values. So it's a discussion on the inventory and the valuation of the assets. So you might find it weird. We give many, many examples in the book, but you have to understand that valuation, so this kind of play on valuation has always to do with undervaluation of physical assets, such as business assets, land, or real estate assets, like those assets that are not sold, that are kept into the family. You remember the one I was calling like structuring assets before? Then you have like people play on the valuation and always the undervaluation because of the tax issue, which is at stake at that moment too, at the moment of succession and at the moment of divorce, right? So you discuss about the valuation, but you can also discuss about the inventory. So we found many, many situations when there was a gift, like 15 years before, that was not counted. We found also situations when it was like very specific professional assets, for instance, a clientele, which was not counted. And everyone knew that it was not counted. So here, what is going on in the notary office is establishing the inventory and the valuation of the assets ex post in accordance with the law. This is what actually notaries actually do. Okay. So we call this, I understand that you understand the title now, like reversed accounting. We called it reversed accounting because it was like the opposite of the formal accounting. Now you have to, in the book, we don't only call it reversed accounting, we call it also sexist accounting, because you remember what I explained to you earlier. who gets the structuring asset more frequently? Men. And who receives more often undervalued monetary compensations? Women. So in practice, this type of accounting has unequal and gender-biased effects. Oops, sorry. So why do legal professionals act like this? Is it because they are sexist themselves? So we've met sexist lawyers and more often sexist notaries because this is a very, very conservative profession. But most of the time, legal professionals didn't give sexist pitches to us. In fact, we don't need to assume they are sexist to understand why they do what they do. The first explanation lies in their professional values. In France, only 5% of successions and 3% of liquidations of marital property are taken to court, which means that the vast majority of family asset distributions upon the occasion of a death or divorce stays in the offices of legal professionals, thanks to the work of notaries and lawyers. Notaries are fond of presenting themselves as asset doctors and guarantors of family peace. Actually, in every interview we did with notaries in France, they were saying this. We want to guarantee family peace. Some lawyers get also recognition for their experience in negotiated law and consider their work as a kind of mediation, promoting amicable ways of settling disputes. So for these professionals, building consensus is exactly the essence of their work. So they are unlikely to question the economic arrangements that are the result of power relations within the family. The second explanation is who these legal professionals are. Notaries in France are particularly attached to ensuring the continuity of family businesses because they themselves come from families that own their own business and profited from significant gifts in order to practice there. So here you have to understand that notary offices, it costs a lot of money to become an officier ministériel. Like in the Paris area, it's more than 1 million euro. In average in France, it's like 500,000, which means that they come very often from notary families themselves, so from father to son, or from business. A lot of them have business-owning parents, like almost all of them that we met had business-owning parents, like doctors, pharmacists, restaurant and hotel keepers, bakers, etc., farmers. So notaries generally have a gendered and socially situated conception of the rightful heir that fits that of propertied families. Many notaries ask their clients imagine the rightful heir to be male and an in-family transfer to normally be from father to son. So these are pictures that we took from the website, the notary website, the French notary website, at the moment when our book was published in 2020 in France. So these are the pictures that you could see about inheritance and gift and family businesses from one generation to the next. So there was not the equivalent. So actually they changed the website quite recently. So you cannot find these images anymore in 2023. They changed it 1 or 2 months ago. But you don't see any woman either now. It's a little bit less blue and father and son, but still there are no women. And because we traveled a bit with this book, we found also this kind of pictures in Germany on the German notaries website. I put also the Belgium one, but I was in Montreal last month and I realized that in Quebec it was the same thing, so yeah. Okay, do the legal professionals that we followed consciously try to favor men over women? The question of intentionality is probably not the right one to ask. Reversed accounting is what Pierre Bourdieu calls a logic of practice, an incorporated system of dispositions that without forming an intention is nonetheless able to orient practices in an unconscious and systematic way. If lawyers and notaries calculate this way, it's mainly because they are trying to build a consensus to protect family relations. Gendered representations of the social order run throughout this mode of accounting around the definition of the rightful heir and the good business owner. but also around the reasonable widow and the good mother. Economic transfers between relatives bear the traces of subconscious sexism incorporated into the very ways that notaries and lawyers calculate. Finally, you could say like, okay, so these legal professionals, they just keep family peace, they don't question the inequality that arises inside the families, but in a certain way, they don't do that much. This is not our conclusion, because doing what they do, these legal professionals conceal and legitimize this inequality under the law, because once it went through the notary office, it's signed and stamped as equal, right? So in the book, we show also the central role of taxation in producing this kind of family peace. It can take very different forms depending on class background, but it is usually unfavorable to women. In most families, all family members agree that family wealth should be protected from tax. Women accept the undervaluation of assets going to their brothers or ex-husbands so that the family pays less tax. Notaries and lawyers play on the tax argument to build consensus a lot. So in families with property, men are in charge of managing wealth, and avoiding taxes legitimizes their hiding or underestimating wealth from the tax authorities and also from their wives and sisters. So who's this woman? Do I still have time? I guess so.
We're almost up, so take just a few minutes.
Okay, I'm almost done. So this woman is Sarah Paulsgrove, and she was in the New York Times magazine in 2016, and also this picture comes from the Sunday Times, because she had the great luck of having the Panama Papers scandal erupt during her divorce proceedings in Canada. So she was the wife of a Finnish entrepreneur, Robert Österlund, and she and her lawyers discovered that her husband had a fortune worth $400 million, much more than the few million he claimed. Their in-depth investigation in connection with the divorce led them to deconstruct the arcana of a financial empire composed of offshore companies, trusts in the Cook Islands, and shell corporations in the Bahamas and other tax havens worldwide. So, of course, this kind of international scale financial engineering only concerns the greatest of fortunes. But many wives, daughters, and sisters of businessmen, members of the professions, and even shopkeepers and farmers may, at the time of divorce or succession, find themselves not knowing exactly what the family net worth is. When this happens, they have trouble asserting their rights over wealth. Tax optimization, concealment, and sometimes, like here, outright fraud implemented by legal and financial management professionals block the legal compensation mechanism serving women. However, the effectiveness of this production of ignorance in family wealth arrangements depends on the degree of sophistication of the tools used to trick the tax administration. So this table is not from our book, but from one of our colleagues, Camille Erlingiré, Rester riche, a book, unfortunately, which exists only in French. She worked on people paying the wealth tax on private fortune, l'ISF, before it was downsized by Emmanuel Macron in 2018. And she took the French Wealth Survey and asked and checked the first question of the survey, which is to identify who is the most knowledgeable of the management of household assets. And it is this person who answers the questionnaire in the household. By analyzing the answer to this question, she shows that the richer the household, the more the man of the couple answers the questionnaire alone. In short, the richer the family, the more the man has a monopoly on information about the property. In the book, we show the extent of economic inequality in wealthy families. We also describe how these inequalities play out in poor families. This is Ingrid Levavasseur, so the introduction of the book is built on her and the Bezos family, and Mackenzie Scott. So Ingrid Levavasseur, she was a yellow vest activist in 2018, and she put on the public conversation the question of single mother households who even if they have a job, have a very hard time making the ends meet. So what we, in wealthy families, we showed that men manage wealth, and in poor families, like in Ingrid Levavasseur's one, women manage poverty. So I'm not developing that, but yeah. And this, yeah, I don't have time for this. You will ask me a question about it if you want. Okay, a few words of conclusion. So to conclude, we've seen that wealthy families, and especially the men in these families, had different resources to protect this wealth and maintain their social status. They are also assisted by legal professionals, sometimes from birth. The intervention of these legal professionals doesn't weaken the unequal mechanism at work in the family. It reinforces and legitimizes them. These had political implications. So Thomas Piketty in France, and I know where I'm speaking here, so, economists like part of this group, the Wealth Inequality Lab, proposes to fight wealth inequalities through an ambitious redistributive tax policy. And we, of course, agree with that, but we think also that through our work, we see that rich families know how to protect their wealth from taxation and justice, to pass it on from father to son. Our research raises other issues. Why in France, for instance, are professionals such as notaries who are mandated to enforce the law and collect taxes are also business owners and not civil servants? This is a question that is never raised by no political parties in France. Our work also shows the importance of having individual data, not just household data, to understand gender inequalities. The household unit of observation hides inequalities between spouses of different sex categories. This is a problem for measuring gender inequalities, but also for understanding class inequalities. So I'm working right now on a socioeconomic review special issue on the gender wealth gap, and it was like striking that half of the proposals came from Germany because they have this German socioeconomic panel. So we need an international effort to have better data, and especially here in the US when we don't have individual data concerning wealth. Our research shows how gender and class inequalities are intertwined. In order to transmit their social status and economic capital, family strategies of social reproduction rely on the distribution of gender roles in each generation. The reproduction of the class society is based on the reproduction of the gender order. This intersectional approach to wealth inequality deserves to be developed further, particularly by including the issue of race inequality. This is not easy at all in France, where official statistic surveys prohibit the use of ethnic or racial categories. This is very difficult. But some research already exists on the subject, and we expect a lot from it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Céline, for this excellent presentation. So I wanted to start the Q&A. So this is Sibylle Gollac, who has been attending the presentation and will be present with us to help answer questions. And I wanted to start with perhaps one or two questions that we received, before. Yes, before the presentation, and the first one, that is a question an economist is going to ask a sociologist, and I know it's tough for you to answer these questions, but we saw that the law is gender neutral in France, and yet it doesn't work, for all the reasons you mentioned. So, what type of policies can you think about that could help improve the balance of capital and wealth between women and men in an advanced economic country like France?
Sibylle?
Yeah.
Can you hear us?
So, yes, I can hear you. Do you hear me? Yeah, perfectly. Yeah. Okay. We are sociologists. We are very comfortable describing society and identifying problems, and less comfortable giving advice on public policy. But there's a simple and obvious answer to this question. We could just do away with inheritance. It sounds a bit crazy, but the father of sociology, Émile Durkheim, thought that in a meritocratic society, inheritance should quickly disappear. He wrote it, and we quote it in our book. But today, however, it seems a very radical idea. What can we hope for? What can we claim? There are more modest reforms within reach. For example, since the publication of our research team's work and of our book, a service for deducting child support payments at source has been set up in France, and this has greatly improved the situation for some mothers. And more ambitiously, I don't know if it's the case in the US, but in France, economists and politicians, they begin to consider a reform of the tax system. And the challenge is to move from a system of inter-household and inter-family redistribution to a redistributive system that ensures the autonomy of each individual within families. And our work also shows that we need to tackle the organization of legal professions. The relationship between, we have to tackle the relationship between the private sector, the justice system, and the tax administration. If the same people are in charge of enforcing laws, collecting taxes, and helping litigants to protect their private interests, this is problematic. And in France, notaries do all three. But I think in the United States, lawyers can build their careers by successively performing these functions. And there is another problem. The gender wealth gap is on the rise. And why is this serious? Because wealth is increasingly crucial in defining people's social status and living conditions. And things could be a little bit different. I will give you an example. I met a woman who had accepted that her brother, a baker, it's an example in the book, should inherit a much larger share than she did. And she had also been divorced twice. And each time she had left the house to her ex-husband. And she told me, I prefer not to argue with my brother, my parents. I didn't want to argue with the father of my children. So she didn't want to feel she owed them anything, and she wanted to feel free. This woman, she had left school at 17, but she had managed to become an employee in a large French public company. She was a kind of civil servant, and she couldn't be fired. She had access to social housing. Her children were well educated in the public sector, and she was able to retire at 60 with a decent pension. But you know, in France, public schools, pay-as-you-go pensions, social housing, all these important systems in France are under threat today. And it's a tragedy for a lot of women. And should women be encouraged to accumulate wealth as much as men? Do we need economic empowerment, financial education? Why not? But you can't accumulate more wealth without drawing more from environmental resources. So the other question is, wouldn't it be interesting in men, and especially those from wealthier groups and wealthier countries, learn to work differently and to count differently?
Thank you. Thank you very much. So let's take some questions from the audience here. Okay, so let's start here in the first row.
Hi, thank you so much for your time on your great research on this. What struck me was one of the charts where the notaire was the realistic side, wanted to keep peace. And I was trying to imagine what was it like in that room? if you're going to have peace, did they not consider the woman's view during these discussions? What occurred to negotiate? Was there any negotiation at all? Or was it like the example from your colleague who said they just didn't want to make waves? Well, how can you have peace and be silent?
Sibylle, do
Okay.
you want to
I
start?
can try and you can continue
Yeah.
if it's necessary. So it's a very important question because a lot of women we meet, they know that they could claim for more money or for a compensatory benefit. What is very important is that they learn to make what Arlie Hochschild call emotional work, and they learn to do it to make peace in the family. They are able to do it, but for them, it's very hard to go to fight, and it's very hard because in the French system, judges make their decision for the best interest of the children. And what says the law is that the best interest of the children is to have it's two parents that raise them together, even if they broke up. So a lot of women think that if they claim a higher child support or a compensatory benefit, they will be in conflict with their ex-husband and with the father of their children. So they prefer give up. And in inheritance, it's the same thing. They don't want to fight because for them, the family piece is also important. And yeah.
Yeah, we give many examples in the book of women trying to, in French we say arrondir les angles, which means like, trying inside the families that people don't fight each other. And men have, like, inheritance at the moment of estate planning. We saw that some men, like sons, were more eager to fight and to speak up, whereas women were more like saying, it's costful for me to go to court. I mean, it's costful to go to court because it's costful, like it costs some money, but also it's costful to break this family peace. So, because as we know, like, women are raised as the ones who care for each other and all. And after the publication, so in the book, it was often after 2-3 hours of interviews that these women were saying, I know this is unfair, it was unfair, but I accepted it because I didn't want to fight against my brother, my parents, etc. And after the publication of the book, so we presented this book to so many places in France, and a lot of women wrote to us saying, oh, it's incredible, this is my story, but I thought it was only in my family. There are not so many places where you can speak about this. You don't speak about these topics, like with your neighbors, with your friends. You don't speak about it. And they were all thinking that it was specific to their situation. And yeah.
It seems so much a nexus of the challenge that if men can stand and say, oh no, let's have peace, Mrs., the women need to say that to the men. And that's the core of one of the cores of this economic disparity. And it's incumbent on the women to stand up.
I can see Ekedi who's dying or saying something. And Sibylle, you have to know that Ekedi, who was our student, her office is Arlie Hochschild office. I discovered that today, and you mentioned Arlie, so it's like.
Yes, just to piggyback on this, I think what your book shows really, really well is that the status quo in the family, in the notaire's office, with the lawyer, and also with the government agencies, always works against women. So women have the additional cost of always having to be the troublemaker to get what is their own. And that then means, so there's this initial inequality, sort of symbolic, emotional inequality, that they have to be the troublemaker. And we could say that's true across a whole range of feminist issues, where women have to learn to be the killjoy and the troublemaker and pay a lot of cost for it. And in addition, it meets their emotional socialization, which tends to be more turned towards conciliation, agreeability, collective interest, more than men. But so it's true that you could say it's incumbent on women, but that doesn't necessarily take into account that the fact of fighting also has a massive cost that then they can pay in terms of broken relationships, in terms of fatigue and drain, especially when their life, because they have less money, their lives are already more drained emotionally. And I think that's a huge dimension of inequality that's also true across race, across many dimensions. Anyway, sorry, I just wanted to piggyback on this.
Thank you, Ekeli.
A rebound on this because we had a few questions from the chat. So one related to this, one person asked, marriage, is an unequal institution as you've described, but the person was saying the fact that there will be less marriage, and there is already less marriage in France, does that favor or disfavor women, knowing that marriage is not perfect, but that's what we had? So what's your view on this?
So yeah, there's a paradox because in France, 60% of children are born out of wedlock. So there is a lot of couples who aren't married. But
60.
what 60?
60,
yes.
yeah.
Yeah. What the paradox is that for feminists, historically, marriage is patriarchy, and in France, since 1965, 1985, it was when a woman was married, she can't open a bank account without the authorization of her husband. So it was really a patriarchy. But now the law is neutral. We have equal rights in marriage, and people marry less and less. And when they marry, it's with the separation of assets. So and it's today in France, marriage is a protection for women. In case of separation, of divorce, they can. There is this system, la communauté de biens réduite aux acquets. They can claim for 60%, 50% of the assets, and for a compensatory benefit. So, but they don't marry anymore.
Yeah, and this is why the Catholic newspaper in France, La Croix, loves our book.
Yeah.
Because they're like, people, go marry and please don't divorce. It's bad for women. That we don't say that at all in the book. Actually, in the book, we open up a conversation about like unmarried couples. Shouldn't they have the same rights? Like, for instance, two things very important in France at the moment of divorce. Actually, right now, unmarried couples, even if they spend like 20 years together, had children and all, the women cannot ask for alimony, prestation compensatoire, if they were not married. And the second thing is like pension de réversion, like retirement pension. Like today, 40% of what women get as retirement pension come from what their husband's rights on this retirement pension after the death, because of the age difference, which is enormous. And now we think that we have here a very important problems coming up to us in France, which is the fact that all these new generations of women who didn't get married, who divorced, they will end with all of the discriminations against them still now on the professional market. and income and the income gap and all, they will have a very hard time at the moment of retirement. So, yeah.
So interesting, when marriage becomes good for women, it disappears.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Kind of a paradox, yeah.
Let's take a question from the audience. I think the gentleman at the back.
Thank you. So I have a very simple question. Does any of this surprise you? Structural inequality is insanely difficult to unpack and to devolve. I mean, look at racism in the US, look at caste in India, gender gap, the patriarchy in Europe should be no more difficult. I mean, what is to say that there's not a sort of a cultural component lacking in your whole book? In the same question about agency for women, you know, France didn't give women suffrage until after World War II. Britain and France got it after World War I. I mean, maybe there's some cultural thing about France that helps amplify some of the things you're looking at.
Bill, you want to answer? I can do it if you...
Go. And
Okay, you will follow up. So
Mhm.
We are sociologists. So if we just say this is cultural, then we don't have any work anymore, you know? Our work is precisely to see what is going on. And also what I would like to answer is the fact that in France, like every single person thinks that we are a very equal country, kind of a model for so many aspects, including gender inequality. We give a lot of lessons to the world, you know. Okay, and also people, and we presented this book to a lot of students in universities, but also in high schools, and a lot of young women, they think that we are on the highway of economic inequality. I mean, we're in a country where women are more educated than men now, and the gender pay gap is still there, but it's getting closer and closer, even if it's, so we're almost there, and everyone was like, we're almost there. But if you watch the gender wealth inequality, which was an indicator that no one was watching, then you have a completely different story. So the norm is equality. We think that this is it. And I think it's very important to watch things, to confront the fact that this is not it. And checking this gender wealth gap and studying it, document it, because if you cannot even measure the gender wealth gap, then there is no problem, right? So, yeah. Sibylle, I don't know if you want to add something.
Yeah, perhaps it's important to say that there is a lot of changes. It's okay?
Yeah. Go ahead. Go
okay.
ahead.
You know, in fact, women spend today 1 hour less a day on domestic tasks than they did in the 80s, for example. It's no thanks to men, because they spend only 5 minutes more on these tasks than they did in the 80s. But women have been able to enter on the labor market on a massive scale. And in France, they remain there even when they have young children. Their professional careers are very important to them, and they have acquired the right to study and to qualify for all diplomas. They are more educated than men in France today, but the gender wealth gap is increasing, like Céline remembered us, and women are more and more highly educated, and wealth is increasingly important to ensure a certain social status in 21st century French society. And this shows, like you said, the resilience of patriarchy, but there is a lot of changes. And I agree with Céline. We can't just say it's cultural and give it.
Thank you. Let's take one last question, Leslie.
Thank you. So thanks so much for this work. I do think that that gender wealth inequality is growing is surprising. So I don't think that's such an obvious result. And looking at those microdynamics is just really fascinating. So, it made me wonder, it seems like you can show that the same dynamics that are reinforcing wealth inequality are reinforcing gender inequality, the same microdynamics, and that the interests in wealth inequality are leading to inequality around gender as a result. But it doesn't, it does not seem that the dynamics around gender inequality are actually increasing wealth inequality. Like the actual microdynamics seems like what's happening, the microdynamics around gender, if anything, seem like they lead to, at times, a certain, like a less rational division for those families, like that incompetent, son who ends up selling and doesn't do such a good job. So I think it's just interesting. You're not trying to exactly make this kind of causal argument, but I was curious how strongly you would make the claims around the three.
Well, go Céline, because
it's a difficult
yeah.
question. We try to do it in the book, actually, to really take into account class inequality and gender inequality, like inter-family wealth inequality and intra-family wealth inequality. And the argument that we push in the book, maybe it's not perfect, and is the fact that through those, the class inequality has to do with these family strategies of social reproduction that are super gendered, which is the point that we make. And so those family strategies of social reproduction, so this is the old concept of Bourdieu from the 1960s, and our professor who was Florence Weber in École Normale Supérieure, and I'm very happy that you mentioned that we have to do an interdisciplinary effort on this. We were trained at the École Normale Supérieure as economists and sociologists, and that's why we could do this research. And Florence Weber, she didn't like our professor, she didn't like this concept. She was like, I mean, it's quite rigid, like, speaking of these strategies. And I taught at NYU this semester, and one of my students was from India, and she was like, so like a country like India, like marriage strategies, it's like obvious. In France, marriage strategies, it's not as obvious, right? But I'm currently working now on very wealthy women, either heirs or businesswomen. And I realized that, like, for the old money families, like the marriage strategies, it's really exist. I mean, they meet their partners through rallies, like the rallies, it's called like that in France, like through this kind of very, and the parents have a word to say about the marriage and the big names and all. So it seems to be, so those family strategies of social reproduction are gendered. And depending on the social class, they can be super strict and quite obvious, or quite hidden and concealed, and you don't see them so obviously. But when you here in the United States, like all the academics that I meet, like they have a very hard time with financing their children's education at university. And it's also a way, it's also a family strategy of social reproduction. It's also gendered, because daughters and sons, they don't go to the same kind of, some do math, the others do more like literary studies that pay less. So everything is gendered. And those family strategies of social reproduction are gendered in different social classes, and they contribute to the class, to the social class wealth inequality also. Sibylle, maybe you want to give a try? That it's quite the big question.
Yeah, there is some examples in our family monographs where parents did something more original, like a father wanted that her second daughter become, I'm sorry, my English is so bad. Become a bricklayer or mason. Mason? Yeah. And he wanted to pass on his company, but when she come, I'm so sorry. On construction sites, it was so awful because all the other masons were like, it's a girl, and so it was very difficult, and she gave up. And so I think, yes, we have to keep in mind that it was exactly what Céline was saying. It's that all is gendered, so it's very costful for a family to try to do things in a different way. Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much, Céline and Sibylle, for this presentation and answering all our questions. So this closes, the presentation part, and I invite everybody, to the reception just outside. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yes. And I also wanted to thank the organizers, Eva, Ajit, Christian Gordon, and many others that helped make this happen and organize this wonderful event. Thank you.
Thank you.